There are moments in life when you realize, no matter how hard you try, you'll always be on the outside looking in. From family dinners where my father's smile was reserved for my sister, to the praise he showered on my brother for his achievements, I was a background character in my own family's narrative. But what hurt the most was the day he refused to walk me down the aisle, a decision that revealed not just favoritism, but a wound deeper than any words could inflict. How did the father-daughter bond deteriorate to this? Join me as I turn back the pages of memory to uncover the source of those wounds and the untold story behind them. The story begins. Let me paint a picture of who I am. I'm Grace, 30 years old, the head nurse at Harbor Haven Nursing Home. I'm the middle child in a family of 3, standing between my older brother Ethan, 34, a corporate lawyer, and my younger sister Sophia, 28, an aspiring social media influencer. Growing up, my family seemed like a picture-perfect suburban American household. My mother, Margaret, 57, always did her best to be a fair parent to all 3 of us. She's a dedicated teacher, always finding ways to give each of us her attention in our own unique way. But my father, Charles, 63, a former executive in the corporate world, well, things get complicated from here. My father never hid his favoritism. Sophia was his precious princess, and Ethan, as the only son, naturally had a bond with him over the stereotypical, manly things: watching football, learning about cars, discussing business strategies. And then there was me, always living in the shadow of their affection. It wasn't that I lacked material things. When gifts were exchanged, I got new clothes like Sophia or the same quality school supplies as Ethan. But the difference was in the emotional currency. The way my father's eyes would light up when Sophia entered the room, or how he would lean forward when Ethan talked about his day in law school. As for me, my accomplishments in nursing school, my promotions at work, those were met with polite nods and hasty topic changes, with no real interest in what I had achieved. That's when I felt the sting of inferiority compared to Sophia, and the affection my father had for her was always something distant and unattainable. Grace will just be Grace, he'd dismissively say whenever my mother tried to highlight my successes. The sentence was like a sharp knife, cutting through all of Emma's efforts to gain her father's recognition. My mother would look at me with a guilty expression, as if she were sorry for not being able to change anything. Ethan always tried to redirect the conversation to my achievements, but the pain ran too deep, and the pattern had already been set from the start. It became the unspoken reality of our family, a reality I couldn't change. Looking back at my childhood, I can pinpoint specific moments when I realized I was different in my father's eyes. I remember when I was 8, standing by the garage door, wearing the volunteer shirt from the Children's Hospital's nursing program, hoping my father would notice and invite me to join him. "Hey, Dad, can Grace join us?" Ethan asked, as always, the one looking out for me. He had shown the protective spirit that would later shape his career as a lawyer. "This is a man's job," my father replied, not even looking at me. "Grace has her little hospital game." That rejection stung, but it was Ethan who made sure I would learn what Dad had taught him. That night, he took me back to the garage and showed me everything my father had taught him. It became a ritual. Ethan learned from Dad and then secretly taught me. When Dad taught Ethan how to drive, manage finances, and negotiate, Ethan would make sure to pass those lessons on to me. My mother saw it all. Being a teacher herself, she could recognize the dynamics, and I knew it hurt her. She tried to compensate by becoming more involved in my school events, helping me with science projects about healthcare, and supporting my dream of becoming a nurse, but she never directly confronted my father about his behavior. Maybe she thought doing so would only make things worse, or maybe she didn't know how to fight it. "Your love for caring for others is special, Grace," she'd tell me. "It's a gift of your own." As for Sophia, she relished her role as Daddy's princess. Even though many teachers had raised concerns about her attitude at school, my father just waved it off with a smile. "She's just an energetic little thing," as if that explained everything. Now, at 28, she's still trying to turn that energy into Instagram fame, living off my father's generosity while building her personal brand. The dynamic in my family now is complex, to say the least. Ethan and I are very close. He's not just my brother but my most trusted friend and my fiercest protector. He can hardly stand being in the same room as Sophia, seeing her only at mandatory family gatherings. My mother tries to keep the peace, while her new husband, William, wisely keeps his distance from the family drama. He's successful in his own right, running a thriving IT company, but he never brags or tries to replace my father's role. Everything started to change about 7 years ago when my mother and father divorced. Although they always said the reason was incompatibility, none of us really knew the true cause. Still, they both kept the truth hidden, preferring to maintain that facade of peace. Since the divorce, I limited my visits to my father. We both understood the dynamics of our relationship, and there was no reason to pretend otherwise. I spent most of my free time at my mother's house, often scheduling visits with Ethan. Family gatherings had a predictable pattern now. Ethan and I would visit my mother together, while Sophia would show up on her own. The only time we were forced to meet was during Christmas, and even then, the tension was palpable. 3 years ago, things changed when my mother started dating William, a 59-year-old CEO in the tech industry. They met at a wellness retreat, which was a stark contrast to my mother's previous life as a teacher. William was nothing like I had imagined. He was successful but humble, respected boundaries, and genuinely tried to understand the complicated dynamics in our family without ever overstepping. "I'll be here if you need me," he said one evening during a family dinner, "but I know you still have your father, and I respect that." Ironically, while William maintained a respectful distance, my father grew increasingly hostile toward him. At first, I thought it was partly due to my father's emotional failures and his disillusionment with life. His failed relationships and persistent loneliness probably made him bitter and envious of anyone who had what he had lost. But there was another reason. William's success in the tech industry gave my mother a life my father could never provide. The travel photos on social media, the new house in a prestigious neighborhood, the luxury car in the driveway, they were constant reminders of my father's failures, things he couldn't escape. Ethan tried repeatedly to explain to him, "Dad, we're not replacing you," he explained in his calm, lawyerly tone, "we're just trying to clarify the situation." But my father's jealousy manifested in small actions, like mocking William's age, asking loaded questions about their relationship at family gatherings. Every time, I could see the anger and bitterness in my father's eyes, as if he couldn't accept that someone else could take the place he once hoped to occupy. I considered myself lucky not to have to face these awkward moments often, thanks to limiting my encounters with my father. Still, I heard enough from Ethan to understand how bad things had become. Things continued like this until a few months ago, when my boyfriend, Lucas, a 34-year-old doctor whom I met through work, proposed to me. We had been together for years, building a relationship based on mutual respect and understanding, something I had learned from witnessing my parents' broken marriage. We decided on a short engagement, wanting to focus on the future rather than the long preparations for a wedding. When we announced the news through a video call to the family, their reactions were exactly what I expected. My mother was genuinely thrilled, while William congratulated us sincerely. Ethan smiled broadly, looking every bit the proud older brother. "My little sister is getting married," he said, his lawyer's tone briefly slipping into something more heartfelt. "Lucas, you'd better take good care of her. I know all the loopholes in the law." My father's response was just as I had anticipated, a quiet nod and a distracted congratulations. But it was Sophia's reaction that caught everyone's attention. Her forced smile barely concealed her discomfort, and she quickly left the call, claiming poor internet connection. I later saw her updating her Instagram stories. It was hard to believe there had been a connection issue. That night, I called Ethan privately, my hand trembling slightly as I voiced my concerns. "Ethan, I want you to walk me down the aisle," I said, my voice choked with emotion. There was a heavy silence on the other end. When Ethan finally spoke, his voice was soft but filled with worry. "I'm really touched," he said, using the cautious tone he often reserved for court. "And trust me, nothing would make me prouder. But Dad will make a huge scene, you know that, I know what he'll do." My throat tightened. "You're truly my father more than just my dad, you know? The things you've taught me, things my father should have taught me." I know, Ethan sighed, and I'd love nothing more than to do this for you, but think about your wedding day. Do you want it overshadowed by your dad's drama? He'll make sure everyone knows how disrespected he feels. I hated that he was right, and once again, I was forced to accommodate my father's feelings while my own emotions didn't seem to matter. You've always been important to me, Ethan reassured. But from a strategic standpoint, and this is the lawyer in me talking, having your father take on this role might be the easiest way. That day has to be about you and Lucas, not about complicated family dynamics. I couldn't shake off the resentment, but I knew he was right. A few weeks later, Sophia announced her engagement to Kevin. Lucas and I exchanged a glance, realizing what this meant. Sophia couldn't stand not being the center of attention, and this was her way of reclaiming the spotlight. Although Sophia tried to overshadow my wedding, she couldn't manage to organize her own before ours. She set her date just 4 weeks after ours, and her displeasure was evident in every family conversation. She even tried to guilt-trip me into postponing my wedding. "Grace, wouldn't it be so special if you were the first bride?" she pleaded during a family video call. "You've always dreamed of a spring wedding." I stood firm. "The venue is already booked, Sophia. All the deposits are paid. Lucas and I are keeping our date." What I didn't expect was the shock that came when I discussed with my father the idea of him walking me down the aisle, a conversation I had dreaded for a long time. He dropped the news, leaving me both furious and strangely relieved. "I'm sorry, Grace," he said, showing no remorse. "I promised your sister years ago that I would walk her down the aisle first. I can't break that promise to Sophia." I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing. This was the perfect reason for me to get exactly what I wanted, to be given what I had always hoped for, by the very person I had been avoiding. I tried to summon what I hoped was a look of disappointment, my voice trembling slightly. "I understand," I said, proud of how little my voice quivered. "A promise is a promise, right?" As soon as I hung up, I called Ethan. His reaction was exactly what I had hoped for, righteous anger on my behalf. "If I'd known your dad would pull this, I would have agreed to walk you down the aisle from the moment you asked." His voice was filled with fury. "This is ridiculous." I couldn't help but smile. "Ethan, don't you see? This is perfect. Now I can get exactly what I wanted from the start. My brother will walk me down the aisle." "I get it now," he said, his voice calming. "If your dad wants to play this game, we'll play by our rules. It would be an honor to walk you down the aisle." This unexpected turn of events was actually going in the right direction. Everything was falling into place. Despite the usual tensions that come with wedding planning, I focused on finalizing the details with vendors and organizing the honeymoon with Lucas. Dad had completely backed out of my wedding preparations, too caught up in the extravagant plans for Sophia's wedding, which he was fully financing. Lucas and I, on the other hand, were covering our own wedding expenses, making all decisions within our budget. Then came yesterday's video call, and everything was thrown into chaos. Sophia dropped another bombshell on my dad. "Dad," she said, sweetly enough to make me nauseous, "I've thought it over, and I want William to walk me down the aisle." The silence on the other end of the phone was suffocating. William's face was frozen in shock. Mom's hand flew to her mouth and Dad looked like he'd been slapped in the face. The man who had once been a successful executive now seemed to shrink before us. Dad's voice was weak, almost a whisper. "My daughter." "Why William?" Dad asked, his voice choking. Sophia responded firmly, more certain this time. "William has been there for me more lately, and this just feels right." William, to his credit, looked uncomfortable. "Sophia, I think we should talk more about this." But Sophia cut him off and ended the call, leaving us in stunned silence. Less than a few minutes later, my phone rang again. It was Dad calling. I sent it to voicemail. This wasn't my problem. I had other things to worry about. The wedding details still needed to be finalized, and I was about to head to my final dress fitting. At midnight, my phone rang again. This time, it was Dad, his voice heavy with tears. "Grace, my daughter, I was wrong. I truly was wrong. Please let me walk you down the aisle." Complex wave of emotions surged within me. satisfaction, a hint of pity, and a weary kind of anger. Dad, I appreciate your feelings, but this is between you and Sophia. My wedding plans are set. Ethan will be the one to walk me down the aisle. But I'm your father. Dad's voice rose. Ethan is not a replacement. He's my choice. He has always been the one beside me, teaching me the things you should have taught me. I interrupted Dad's words, my tone resolute. This is not about Sophia, or you, or anyone else. This is my decision. When the call ended, I immediately reached out to Ethan. My hands trembled as I recounted the conversation. He said he talked to you about stepping aside, treating you like a temporary replacement? I paced back and forth in the apartment. Ethan took a deep breath, then fell silent for a moment before responding. But when he spoke, his voice wasn't the usual calm tone. It was filled with intensity. I waited for your dad to call first, hoping he'd at least show some respect. But when he didn't, I had to call him myself. I could feel the hurt in his words. I couldn't hold back, Ethan admitted. I said things I've been holding inside for so long. Things like what? I slumped down on the sofa. Things your dad's done wrong to you, and how unfair he's been to all three of his children, Ethan replied, his voice tinged with sadness. With Sophia, it's clear he didn't teach her anything right. I've lost faith in him, I whispered, tears welling up in my eyes. Sophia is just a product of him. He raised someone selfish, someone who knows nothing but how to hurt others. Ethan let out a bitter laugh. She doesn't respect him either, or else she wouldn't have humiliated him like that. Ethan, I said, my voice trembling as tears began to gather at the corners of my eyes. Tell Dad he's the one who made Sophia this way. Her entitled attitude is all him. Ethan fell silent for a moment, then spoke again, his voice softer, more somber. I know this isn't the right time, but I couldn't stay silent when he keeps trying to use you as a backup plan. In the days that followed, the wedding preparations consumed me. I found a bit of solace in my work. At the nursing home, in the mundane routine of caring for others. Lucas sensed my tension and doubled his efforts to shield me from family drama, handling tense calls and helping me stay on top of tasks. Dad remained stoic during the final family dinner before the wedding. He kept looking back and forth between me and Sophia, who sat across from him, deliberately creating distance, tapping away on his phone as if planning some other wedding, perhaps a media strategy for her big day. I caught Mom silently observing us, her face full of sadness. She then pulled me aside into the kitchen. Sweetheart, I should have stood up for you more when you were younger, she whispered while helping me wash dishes. I thought I was keeping the peace, but I was probably just enabling him. The wedding day arrived, the morning bright and beautiful. I was a bundle of nerves, but not because of the usual pre-wedding jitters. Standing in the modest hotel room we had chosen, so different from the lavish venue Dad had arranged for Sophia's wedding, I couldn't stop wondering if Dad would try to stir trouble. It'll be fine, my mom reassured me as she adjusted my veil. William is keeping an eye on your dad, and Ethan has 2 lawyer friends standing by as strategic guests. I couldn't help but smile at the arrangements. Ethan always knew how to turn my wedding into something that needed to be managed like a legal case. I avoided Dad until the ceremony began. When it was time, Ethan appeared at the door of the bridal suite, in a perfectly tailored suit, wearing the brightest smile I'd ever seen. All my worries melted away. Are you ready, little sis? He asked, extending his arm as we waited for the signal. I could feel Dad's piercing gaze from the family pews, but when the music began and Ethan led me down the aisle, everything else faded away. Lucas's face lit up when he saw me, and in that moment, nothing else mattered. At the reception, I overheard whispers from a few relatives about why Ethan walked me down the aisle instead of Dad. Dad had been tasked with damage control, coming up with some private family agreement to explain it all. Sophia spent the entire reception keeping her distance from Dad, busy documenting everything on her phone, perhaps comparing our simple ceremony with the extravagant party she was about to have. 1 month later, Sophia's wedding day arrived, and I was not there. She had removed Lucas and me from the guest list, perhaps thinking it would hurt me. But instead, I spent the entire day working, and that evening, I enjoyed a quiet dinner with Lucas and Ethan. The following day, my mother called with details about Sophia's wedding. My father had hoped until the very last minute that Sophia would change her mind, but she didn't. The photos she posted spoke volumes. My father's disappointed expression, William's obvious discomfort, my mother's strained smile, and the extravagant decorations my father had paid for, failing to mask the emotional tension in the air. Now, as I embark on married life with Lucas, I feel a surprising sense of peace about everything. My father's actions had consequences. He lost all of his children in different ways, and his personal life remained in turmoil. It may sound harsh, but I see it as a well-deserved reckoning for years of neglecting emotional bonds. Now, I focus on my own life, my career at the nursing home, my new family with Lucas, and my strong connection with Ethan. As for my father and Sophia, they can live in their world of online facades and lavish events they've created for themselves. I have found something more valuable: love and genuine respect. This story offers a profound lesson about respect, family, and complex relationships. What do you think about Charles's treatment of Grace and William? How would you handle envy and injustice within the family? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice could open new perspectives and inspire those facing similar challenges. If you found this story meaningful, don't hesitate to share it with friends and family to spread the message of understanding and change. Thank you for supporting the channel. Please like, share, and subscribe to receive the latest updates. The stories are collected from various sources and do not represent any individual or organization. They are shared with the intention of spreading human values in life and have been rewritten with the support of AI. If there are any mistakes, kindly overlook them with understanding. Wishing you all the best in life.